Get out of my house. You are useless, just like the 9 before you. If you cannot make my son utter a single syllable, then you do not deserve a dime of my money." The shouting echoed off the marble walls of the sprawling Blackwood estate, shaking the crystal chandelier in the foyer. Julian Blackwood, a man whose net worth could buy small countries but whose heart had turned to stone, stood pointing at the heavy oak door. Nanny number 10, a highly recommended specialist from Switzerland with 3 degrees in child psychology, was fleeing in tears, her suitcase dragging behind her on the polished floor. Julian slammed the door shut, the sound reverberating like a gunshot through the silent, cold mansion. He leaned his forehead against the wood, his breathing ragged. 3 years. It had been 3 years since the accident that took his wife Elara, and 3 years since his 7-year-old son, Leo, had spoken a single word. Julian had hired the best doctors, the most expensive therapists, and the most renowned nannies in the world. He had thrown millions of dollars at the problem, treating his son's silence like a broken merger or a failing stock, convinced that if he just applied enough pressure and money, the boy would be fixed. But Leo remained a ghost in his own home, a silent, pale shadow who stared out the window with eyes that held 1,000 years of sorrow. Julian turned around, adjusting his tie, his face hardening back into the mask of the ruthless CEO. He didn't see the woman, standing quietly in the corner of the hallway, clutching a mop bucket and a rag. She tried to make herself as small as possible, blending into the shadows. This was Elara. She wasn't a nanny. She wasn't a doctor. She was the new cleaner, hired through an agency on a minimum wage contract to scrub the floors that Julian Blackwood walked on. Welcome to her secrets, her stories, the place where we unlock the doors to the most private lives and witness the moments that change everything. We are so glad you are here with us today for a story that proves love is a language that doesn't always need words. Before we find out if a simple cleaner can do what a billionaire couldn't, please take a second to hit that like button. It helps these stories reach more people, and we want to get to know our family better. So drop a comment down below, telling us your name and what city you are watching from today. We love reading them. Now, let's step back into the cold halls of the Blackwood estate. Elara gripped her mop handle tighter as she watched the master of the house storm off toward his study. She knew she shouldn't be listening, but her heart ached for the little boy she had seen only in passing. Elara knew what loss felt like. She knew that silence wasn't always an emptiness. Sometimes it was a shield. She had lost her own daughter years ago, a tragedy that had stripped her of her career as a teacher and left her scrubbing floors to survive. But while she had lost her status, she hadn't lost her gift. She waited until the heavy door of Julian's study clicked shut before she moved. She was supposed to be cleaning the gallery on the 2nd floor, but something pulled her toward the east wing, toward the room that always had the door slightly ajar. Leo's room. She pushed the door open gently. The room was filled with expensive toys, electric cars, giant robot dinosaurs, coding sets, everything a child could dream of. But they were all untouched, still in their boxers. Leo was sitting on the window seat, his knees pulled up to his chest, staring out at the gray, rainy garden. He looked so small against the vastness of the window. Elara didn't announce herself. She didn't use the high-pitched, fake cheerful voice that the nannies used. She simply walked in, set her bucket down, and started dusting the shelf next to him. She worked in a rhythmic, calming silence. After 10 minutes, she sensed him looking at her. She didn't turn. She just hummed a soft, melancholic melody, a lullaby she used to sing to her own child. Leo didn't move, but his shoulders relaxed by a fraction of an inch. Elara finished dusting and reached into her apron pocket. She pulled out a small, worn sketchbook and a piece of charcoal. It wasn't an iPad or a flashing toy. It was just paper. She sat on the floor, a few feet away from him, and started to draw. She didn't ask him to look. She didn't demand his attention. She just drew the rainy garden outside. After a few minutes, she slid the paper across the floor toward him, along with the charcoal. And then she went back to cleaning. When she turned around, 5 minutes later, the paper was gone. Leo was holding the charcoal. He hadn't drawn a picture. He had drawn a storm cloud. A heavy, black, scribbled mess that took up the whole page. Elara walked over and knelt down. She didn't say good job or what is that. She looked at the drawing seriously. Then she looked at Leo. She raised her hands and made a sign. She placed her fists against her chest and pulled them down, looking sad. It was American Sign Language for heavy. Then she signed sad. Leo's eyes widened. He had seen doctors who poked him, prodded him, and forced him to look at flashcards. He had seen nannies who begged him to just say hello. But nobody had ever spoken to him without forcing him to speak back. He looked at her hands. Slowly, hesitantly, he mimicked the sign. Heavy? Elara nodded. She signed back. I know. Me. Tu. A connection sparked in that room. Invisible and fragile, but stronger than any medicine money could buy. Over the next 2 weeks, this became their secret ritual. Julian was busier than ever, preparing for the merger of the decade. He was barely home, and when he was shouting into his phone or drinking scotch in his study, stewing in his anger at his broken son. He didn't notice that the house felt different. He didn't notice that Elara was taking twice as long to clean the east wing. Every day, Elara would come in, lock the door, and they would talk. Not with words, but with signs, with drawings, and eventually, with whispers. She taught him that his voice wasn't gone. It was just hiding because it was scared. She told him stories about her own daughter, about the stars, about how it's okay to be sad. She built a bridge across the chasm of his grief, plank by plank. One Tuesday afternoon, the atmosphere in the house was tense. Julian had come home early. The merger was falling apart, and he was in a foul mood. He had a headache that felt like a drill, and he wanted absolute silence. As he walked up the grand staircase, loosening his tie, he heard a sound that made him freeze. It wasn't silence. It was a noise coming from Leo's room, a rhythmic thumping end. Was that giggling? Julian's blood ran cold. Giggling. Leo didn't giggle. He barely breathed. Julian felt a surge of protective rage. Had one of the staff brought a stranger into the house? Was someone tormenting the boy? He marched down the hallway, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The door to Leo's room was closed. He didn't knock. He threw the door open with a crash, ready to fire whoever was disturbing his son. The scene before him stopped him dead in his tracks, but not for the reason he expected. The room was a mess. The expensive toys were pushed aside. In the center of the room, built out of cushions, blankets, and mop handles, was a giant fort, and sitting inside that fort, wearing a paper hat made out of Julian's discarded business reports, was Elara, the cleaner. She was holding a stuffed bear and making it dance, and sitting opposite her, also wearing a paper hat, was Leo. But as soon as the door crashed open, the magic shattered. Leo flinched violently, scrambling backward into the corner of the fort, his eyes wide with terror as he looked at his father. The laughter died instantly, replaced by the suffocating silence that Julian hated so much. Julian looked at the cleaner, this woman in her cheap uniform, sitting on the floor, making a mess of his house, distracting his son with garbage. Sau. Red. All the stress of the failed merger, all the pain of the last 3 years, focused on this one woman. What do you think you are doing? Julian's voice was a low, dangerous growl. Elara scrambled to her feet, dusting off her apron. She looked terrified, but she stood in front of Leo, instinctively shielding him. Sir, we were just playing. I finished my cleaning, and playing. Julian stepped into the room, kicking the cushion fort apart. I don't pay you to play. I pay you to clean the filth, not create. Look at this mess. And look at him. He pointed at Leo, who was now shaking, his head buried in his knees. He is terrified. You are bothering him. Do you have any idea how fragile he is? The doctors said he needs structure, not this circus. He doesn't need structure, sir, Elara said, her voice trembling but surprisingly firm. He needs a father who doesn't shout. Julian stopped. The silence in the room was sudden and absolute. His face turned a shade of purple. Excuse me, he whispered. You are a cleaner. You scrub toilets. How dare you tell me what my son needs? I've spent millions on the best specialists in the world. Who are you? Nobody. I'm the only one he listens to, Elara said, her hands shaking as she clenched them into fists. Because I am the only one who listens to him. Get out, Julian hissed. He walked over to the window and pointed at the gates. "Get out of my house. You are fired. If you are not off this property in 10 minutes, I will have security throw you out. And don't you dare ask for your paycheck. Consider it the cost of the damage you've done to his progress." Elara looked at Julian, then she looked at Leo. The boy was looking at her, his eyes filled with tears, pleading. She wanted to stay. She wanted to fight, but she knew men like Julian. He had the power to destroy her life with a phone call. She swallowed her pride. "I'm sorry, Leo," she whispered. She turned and walked toward the door. Julian stood there, victorious, breathing hard, feeling the satisfaction of having removed the problem. He watched her reach for the handle. He expected her to leave. He expected silence to return. But just as Elara's hand touched the brass doorknob, a sound cut through the air. It was small. It was rusty. It sounded like a rusty gate opening for the first time in years, but it was the loudest sound Julian Blackwood had ever heard. "No!" Julian froze. He spun around. He looked at the corner where his son was huddled. Leo had lowered his hands from his face. He was looking directly at Elara's back. "Leo?" Julian whispered, his heart hammering in his chest. "Did you? Don't go." The voice was raspy, unused, cracking with effort. But the words were clear. "Leo, stood up." He walked out of the ruins of the cushioned fort. He ignored his father completely. He walked past Julian, straight to Elara, and grabbed her hand with both of his small ones. He looked up at her with fierce determination. "Stay," Leo said. Then he looked at his father, his eyes burning with a fire Julian hadn't seen since Elena died. "She stays." Julian Blackwood felt like the floor had just dissolved beneath his feet. He was a man who controlled markets, who intimidated competitors, who never showed weakness. But as he stared at his 7-year-old son, holding the hand of a trembling cleaner and actually speaking words that Julian had prayed to hear for 3 agonizing years, his knees gave out. He literally staggered back and collapsed onto the window seat, clutching the velvet fabric for support. The room was spinning. "Leo," Julian choked out, tears instantly pooling in his eyes, defying his attempts to blink them away. You can speak." Leo didn't answer his father immediately. He didn't let go of Elara's hand. He looked up at the woman who had built him a fort out of cushions and business reports, the woman who had taught him that his grief was not a monster to be feared but a heavy stone that could be put down. He signed something to her rapid, fluid movements of his fingers. Julian watched, bewildered. "What?" Julian asked, his voice breaking. "What is he doing?" Elara took a deep breath. She didn't let go of Leo's hand. She looked at the billionaire, no longer as an employee looking at a boss, but as a human looking at a broken man. "He is signing, Mr. Blackwood," Elara said softly. He said, "Tell him I am not broken. Tell him I was just too full." "Too full," Julian repeated, confusion warring with relief. "Too full of what?" "Of sad," Leo whispered. He turned to his father. "Too full of sad." Mom left. "And you went away too, even when you were here." The words hit Julian like physical blows. He opened his mouth to defend himself, to say that he worked for Leo, that he built the empire for him. But the words died in his throat because he knew, with a terrifying clarity, that the boy was right. Julian hadn't been a father. He had been a manager. He had managed the grief by outsourcing it to doctors and nannies. He had tried to fix his son instead of holding him. I didn't go away, Leo," Julian stammered, sliding off the seat to his knees, crawling across the expensive Persian rug until he was a level with his son. "I was here. I was trying to help you." "You were shouting," Leo said, his voice gaining a little more strength, though it was still raspy. Everyone shouted. "Or they talked at me. Elara." She listened. She talks without noise. Julian looked up at Elara. For the first time, he really saw her. He saw the kindness in her tired eyes, the patience in her posture, the ink stain on her finger where she had been drawing with charcoal. He realized that this woman, whom he had almost thrown out onto the street, had accomplished in 2 weeks what his millions hadn't done in years. She hadn't used science, she had used humanity. "You know sign language?" Julian asked Elara, his voice humble, stripped of all arrogance. Elara nodded. "My daughter," she said quietly, looking down. She was nonverbal for the first 5 years of her life. "I learned it for her. We created our own world. When I lost her, I thought I would never use it again. But then I saw Leo. I saw the way he looked at the window. It was the same look. He wasn't mute because he couldn't speak, sir. He was mute because he felt there was no point in speaking if nobody was understanding the pain." Julian buried his face in his hands. A sob, ugly and raw, tore from his chest. It was the sound of a dam breaking. He cried for his wife. He cried for the years he had lost with his son. And he cried for the arrogance that had almost cost him the only chance at redemption. He cried right there on the floor of the nursery, in front of the cleaner and the boy. And then something miraculous happened. He felt a small hand touch his head. He looked up. Leo was patting his hair, awkwardly, stiffly, just like Julian used to pat Leo's head on the rare occasions he showed affection. "Heavy," Leo whispered, signing the word Elara had taught him. He pointed to Julian's chest. Heavy. Julian nodded, tears streaming down his face. He clumsily tried to copy the sign. "Yes, heavy. So heavy." Leo smiled a real, genuine smile that lit up the gloomy room like a sunrise. "Elara can help carry," Leo said. "She has strong hands." Julian laughed. It was a wet, shaky sound, but it was laughter. He looked at Elara. He wiped his face with his sleeve, ruining his silk shirt. He stood up slowly, feeling unsteady but lighter than he had in years. "Elara," Julian said. He struggled to find the words. "How do you apologize for treating a savior like garbage?" "I am ashamed. I have been a fool, a blind, angry fool. Please, please, don't leave. I will double your salary. Triple it. No, forget that. You are not the cleaner anymore." Elara looked at him warily. "Sir, be his governess," Julian pleaded. "Be his companion." "Be whatever he needs you to be. Just teach me. Teach me how to speak to him. Teach me that language. Teach me how to be a father again." Elara looked at the desperate billionaire, and then down at the boy who was holding her hand so tight his knuckles were white. She smiled. "I don't need triple the salary, Mr. Blackwood," she said, "but I will need a budget for art supplies. And," she pointed to the corner, "we are going to need more cushions. This fort needs an extension if you're going to fit in it too." Julian Blackwood, the shark of Wall Street, the man who terrified boardrooms, nodded eagerly. "Anything. Buy the whole store. Just show me how to start." The following months at the Blackwood estate were a transformation that baffled the tabloids. The society papers couldn't understand why Julian Blackwood had stopped attending high-profile galas and started leaving the office at 4 p.m. every day. If they had looked inside the mansion, they would have seen the CEO of Blackwood Industries sitting on the floor of the nursery, covered in charcoal dust, clumsily signing "I love you" to a laughing boy and a woman who wore a simple dress but commanded more respect in that house than any general. Leo didn't just start speaking. He started singing, shouting, and living. The silence that had haunted the hallways was replaced by the sound of life. Elara didn't just become a governess. She became the heart of the family. She taught Julian that money provides a house, but attention builds a home. One evening, a year later, Julian came home to find Leo asleep on the sofa, his head resting on Elara's lap as she read a book. Julian stood in the doorway, watching. He thought about the day he had almost fired her. He thought about how close he had come to losing everything that mattered because he was too proud to look down at the person scrubbing his floors. Ewulkid Ober placed a blanket over his son and whispered, "Thank you." Elara looked up and smiled. "He did the work, Julian. I just gave him the words." This story reminds us that sometimes The answers to our biggest problems don't come from experts or expensive solutions. Sometimes they come from the most unexpected places, from a cleaner with a mop, from a drawing on a piece of paper, from a simple act of listening. Julian Blackwood thought he could buy a cure for his son's silence, but what Leo really needed was connection. It's a powerful lesson for all of us. Never underestimate the people society overlooks. The person you ignore today might be the only one holding the key to your happiness tomorrow. What do you think about Elara's method? Do you think Julian deserved a second chance so quickly? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and share it with someone you love. It really helps the channel grow and lets us bring you more unbelievable tales like this one. Don't forget to subscribe to Her Secrets, Her Stories, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a moment of emotion. Until next time, remember to listen with your heart, not just your ears. Thanks for watching.